Programming, CDISC Implementation, Big Data for Life Science, and Talent Solutions. In today's presentation, Kevin Lee will go over how will the new FDA technical rejection criteria and rejection process impact CDISC data submissions. I'd like to start off by introducing Kevin. Kevin Lee is the Director of Data Science at Clindata Insight. Kevin has more than 10 years of CDISC experience, helping many organizations to implement CDISC standards. Kevin has worked with industry thought leaders, FDA, CDISC, and FUSE on standards-driven electronic submissions such as CDISC and Electronic Common Technical Document. Kevin currently belongs to the CDISC Atom and Share team, developing CDISC data model, and also serves as a FUSE Computational Science Symposium committee member for the industry collaboration with the FDA on standards implementation. Kevin is a frequent CDISC speaker at various conferences. He has presented more than 20 papers on CDISC implementation. Before I hand the floor over to Kevin, I would like to mention from now until the end, all attendees will be placed on mute. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type them into the question box located at the top left-hand corner of your webinar screen. Our Q&A session will follow the presentation at the end. In addition, we will be recording this webinar and make it available on our website next week. With that, I would like to hand the floor over to Kevin. Kevin, you should have control of the presentation now.
Yeah, hi, Martin. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Good morning for those in the West Coast, and good afternoon for those in East Coast. Thank you for joining our webinar on how will new FDA technical rejection criteria and rejection process impact CDISC data submissions. Actually, one of the joy that we could enjoy in our lives is working with great people. At Clindata, we have a wonderful colleagues, very experienced professional, and such a nice people. So when we preparing this webinar together, we had so much fun at preparing for this webinar because all of us are working so hard together. So I like to take this time to thank our team, Marlene, who prepared operation for this webinar, and Tong, who actually oversaw all this webinar process. Before we start our webinar, we'd like to mention that this webinar does not represent FDA, also not endorsed by FDA. Let us start with a story. Let us imagine that you are the offense lineman at football. For those who do not know about football, the main job of this offense lineman is to protect the quarterback. So imagine that your quarterback is sacked because you failed to block, or even worse, your quarterback got hurt because you failed to do your job. Now, people notice your name because they announce you actually failed the job. Ironically, the best game day for offense linemen is that you protect your quarterback so well so nobody notices you because you did such a great job. I believe that this offense lineman concept applies to us, the biometric department, when we prepare FDA submissions. If we prepared a perfect package, FDA will not reject our submission because technical issue or ask questions to us, and nobody notices us. Our today's webinar will introduce new FDA rejection criteria for CDISC data and rejection process so that we could prepare the perfect submission package and no one notices us because we are doing such a great job. So our agenda is we're going to start with FDA current review process. And there are actually two rejection process. One is a technical rejection and another is refuse to file. And then we will talk about how FDA reject non-CDISC submissions, introduce technical rejection criteria for study data, and rejection process for submissions. And then we're going to talk about how to prepare and keep up with those FDA updates. So before we go into FDA submission process, let's see what biometric department prepare submission data. If you submit legacy data, you have to prepare legacy SAS XPT dataset and legacy SAS program and also TFL SAS programs. If you do the CD submission, you have to prepare SEND SAS dataset XPT, Define.xml, and non-clinical SDRG. For SDTM perspective, you have to prepare SDTM XPT dataset, Define.xml, SDTM annotated blank CRF, and study data review guide. For ADAM dataset, we have to prepare ADAM XPT dataset, Define.xml, and ADRG. It also needs to include ADAM SAS program and some efficacy TFL SAS program as well too. So, see the current FDA standard review process. Once data is submitted, there are mainly 4 stages on FDA review process. First, FDA process submissions for first 14 days, and up to 2 months FDA plan review, about 6 months FDA conduct review, and FDA finally take officer actions. So first 14 days, once FDA receive a complete application through electronic submission gateway, they will perform technical validation for first 3 days. And if the application fail on technical validation, FDA will issue technical rejections according to ECTD validation criteria that we're going to talk about later in our webinar. During that time, FDA also established review team and also confirmed users fee payment for the submissions. In the second phase of plan review, FDA assure that application is complete and ready to inspect. And during that time, FDA also communicates any potential refuse to file deficiency and also correctable file deficiency with the sponsors. And about the day 60, FDA actually making a filing decision such as refuse to file or accept the file applications. During that time, FDA also organized review task, timeline, and schedule, and determine final review classification, whether it's going to be priority or standards. Standard is a 10-month review period, and priority is actually 6 months review period. For next 6 months, FDA actually conduct a review to validate sponsors of a drug, whether drug is a safety and whether it is efficient. And also evaluate the labeling information about the drugs. And then for final months, FDA conduct a wrapping meeting to discuss any outstanding issue, safety, and labeling of the drugs. And then inform FDA decision to the sponsor whether it's going to be regulatory approval or approval with the conditions or rejections. So there are actually 2 rejection processes in FDA. The first thing is technical rejection, and second thing is refuse to file. If you take a look at the whole review process, technical rejection happened first day and 3, and then refuse to file about day 60. So what is the technical rejections? FDA, through technical rejection process, FDA could reject the submission because of its technical deficiency. And this deficiency is based on ECTD validation criteria. This is the first page of ECTD validation criteria in FDA document. You can find this information in the FDA website. And this ECTD validation criteria describes description of errors and its severity level. There are actually 3 severity levels: high, medium, and low. And high is a very serious technical error that prevents FDA processing submissions, and it will require resubmissions. And the medium is may impact reviewability of the submission, but cannot be determined without further inspection by FDA. And the low is a technical error that may or may not impact reviewability or integrity of the submissions. Actually, there are about 150 ECTD validation criteria, and among 150, there are about 50 high severity. So FDA can reject the submission if high severity of ECTD validation criteria is detected in the submissions. Let's see the example. Each criteria has its own number and also description. In this example, TS dataset must be presented for each study. And then the problem is that the sponsor has not submitted TS dataset for each study. So what sponsor need to do is they need to resubmit the whole package, including the TS dataset. And then since it's a high severity, FDA will reject the submission because of this criteria. Another rejection process is refuse to file. When application incomplete or there is a potential deficiency which cannot be easily corrected or have not corrected, and application is not consistent with regulatory practice. The example is such as missing section, such as clinical data, ISS or ISC information, and statistical evaluations, and also missing case of form. And also some application might not complete, such as application is not really organized, and there is a problem is hyperlink, and data tabulation does not indicate the source of the data, an absence of the protocol, and also application failed to include evidence of effectiveness, and also omission of clinical data, information, or analysis. And if application also do not contain electronic data set or important variables, or missing TF Define.xml, or illegible scan case of form, and uncommon MDR. So these are the examples that could lead to refuse to file. So let's kind of take a look at all the process of rejection process. Once sponsor submits the electronic data package or document package to FDA, FDA check whether these submissions could pass clinical validations. If it's not, the submission will be rejected by FDA, and sponsor need to resubmit this to FDA. If the submission passed the technical validation, FDA will receive the application and go on to next stage of the validations, whether the application is complete for review or not. If it's not complete, then FDA will refuse to file application. In that case, sponsor needs to go through this process again. Once FDA determines that application is complete for review, and FDA will start to file the application and conduct the review. So as we all know that there will be big change on December 17, 2016. All the clinical and non-clinical trial data starting after December 17 need to follow CDISC data. So why that is important? We actually asked this question to FDA. Can FDA reject if the data does not follow CDISC standards? FDA say yes. So our next question is, how will FDA reject non-CDISC data? Whether they're going to use a current rejection process that we talk about early in our webinar, or they're going to implement new rejection process. So in order to answer these questions, FDA just released the technical rejection criteria for study data and also technical rejection process for submissions. On the right side of this slide, this is a technical rejection criteria for study data. FDA just released about a couple of weeks ago, and they actually updated a couple of days ago. In this technical rejection criteria for study data, FDA add 4 criteria, and those 4 criteria will be added into ECTD validation criteria. So let's take a look at these 4 new criteria. The first one is a TS dataset. TS dataset must be presented for each study, STTM and also SAND. And then for CD submission, DM, ADSL, and Define.xml must be presented. And correctable study tagging file tag must be used for all standardized dataset. This study tagging file is actually indication about the file information and file existence. Usually it is prepared by the regulatory department. So it's not something that biometric department is prepared. And for each study, no more than 1 data set of the same type should be submitted as new. What they mean is that you cannot have same in the same folder. So that means you cannot have a 2 DM data set in STTM folders. As you see that the high severity is the first 2, and this first 2 could be prepared by biometric department. So let's focus about these 2 for now. So why that CDISC ECTD validation criteria used for rejection process? FDA do not want to implement new process at this moment. They want to use a current rejection. We believe that they want to use current rejection process. So now they are using ECTD validation criteria as a part of the rejection process. And there are 2 rejection process FDA, technical rejections and refuse to file. And then in the recent webinar, FDA mentioned that they do not want to refuse to file for the higher level study standards. So if you look at the rejection process for technical rejection for submissions, once sponsors submit that electronic submission package to FDA, FDA will check whether this submission to conform to required standards using that ECTD rejection criteria of high severity. If there's any criteria that violate that a package is violated, then submission will be rejected by FDA, and technical rejection for submission will be sent to the sponsor by electronic submission gateway. And once it conforms the standards, then submission will be accepted by FDA, and then sponsor will receive the 3rd acknowledgement from the FDA. So why is this TS domain so critical? TS domain include study start date. And this study start date will determine whether study could be used as a legacy data or CDISC data, because this study start date will indeed, if this study start date happen before December 17, 2016, and all that data should be in CDISC data. It is after December 7, 2016, you could have to have a CDISC data. What about the DM and ADS and Define.xml? For STTM, send data submissions, DM and Define.xml are key validators for STTM and send. For ATOM data submission, ADSL and Define.xml are the key validation for ATOM. Well, what if then our rejection, what if our submission got rejected? So now let's talk about how to respond to technical rejections. FDA will send technical rejection for submission through ESG, and then also provide ECTD validation criteria error numbers. As we saw the example, a missing TS is 1734. So FDA will provide this number. And sponsor need to correct the issue by adding TS domain in the package and resubmit the package. So let's look at the use cases. Let's say sponsor submit without TS domain on 2017, January 20. And then the receipt date of the submission is actually going to be noted as 2017 and January 20. But unfortunately, there are technical rejections. So sponsor need to be submitted. So sponsor will submit with a TS domain on January 28th. And then now, receipt date is going to be changed into January 28th. The one thing that we have to look at carefully about this situation is that since the first submission got rejected and second submission got passed, the sponsor actually lose about 8 days. It is not January 20, but now it is January 28th. What that means is that the patient doesn't get the treatments until 8 days later, and sponsor are not able to make a revenue for those 8 days. Let's look at the use case 2. Sponsor submit the CDISC data, but without DM domain on May 20th. But unfortunately, DM domain required for the CDISC data, so it got rejected. And the sponsor will submit the CDISC data with the DM domain on June 10th. And now it passed the technical validations. Just like previous cases, sponsor also lose about 20 days in the submission process. And now our next question is, what about other CDISC validation rule? We talk about TS domain, we talk about DM, and we talk about ADSL that FDA just released in rejection criteria for study data. But we all know that that is a tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of validation criteria from SAND, STTM, ATOM. What about other validation rules? In the rejection criteria for study data document, FDA actually, it says that FDA may use RTF, refuse to file, on any non-CDISC data. What that means is that FDA might going to use it or might not going to use it. They're not sure at this moment. So what is going to be coming? Are we going to have a more CDISC rejection criteria in ECTD validation criteria? Or all other CDISC rejection criteria will be in RTF. As you know that the first is happening day 1 to 3. Second case is happening day 60. Or FDA implement additional rejection process for CDISC data only. So in this kind of unpredictable environment, what do we need to do now? What do we need to prepare? So whether it is a legacy or CDISC data submission, we need to prepare TS domain. And that TS domain need to have study start date. And then if you also prepare Define documentation for legacy data, you also include the TS data set in Define documentations. For CDISC data submissions, TM and Define.xml must be included as TTM and SEND data package, and ADSL and Define.xml also should be included in ADAM data package. And what do we need to do in the futures? We continue to watch out FDA new update, such as whether new rejection criteria will be added to ECTD validation criteria or RTF document. And also follow up and keep up with any new updates since there will be more coming. We also keep training our team so that our team knows what to prepare in study level. It is much easier to prepare the document and data in study level rather than in the submission level. Actually, a lot of people ask me about the question, and it's more like a complaining that there are too many things that we as a programmer and statistician need to do. I mean, in terms of a submission, SEND, STTM, ADAM, Define.xml, review guide need to be prepared. And more updates or changes are coming. There are just simply so many things to prepare on top of what we do at the daily work. So let's kind of look at it this way. The reason that we prepare all these things, documents, data, and report, is that FDA see our data and document, and they clearly understand and they clearly see what we have done. So there will be no rejections because CDISC compliance issue or technical issue, or there will be no questions because CDISC related issue. I mean, if there are questions or rejection, our submission will be delayed, which means we cannot help the patients and also our company lose revenue. So our best game day is that no rejection due to CDISC compliance issues and no or less question from FDA. We talk about how to understand the new FDA rejection criteria and process, and we also talk about how to respond and prepare. And then we also mentioned that we need to keep up with upcoming FDA updates. If we do all of this, then we could actually achieve our best game day. In order to help you to have your best game day, the Clindata could help in the CDISC implementation, such as STTM, ADAM, Define.xml, and review guide. Also, building company-specific standard CDISC standards or standard implementations. We could also provide the CDISC roadmap, like where you are in CDISC implementations, and also what you need to do to achieve your goal in CDISC implementations. This will be very simple, affordable, survey-driven CDISC roadmap services. We also provide FDA e-submission package according to CDISC and electronic common technical document. We noticed that it is not easy for programmers and statisticians to follow ever-increasing and ever-changing FDA update. We provide any update from FDA submission so that programmer and statistician could focus on their daily biostatistic and programming activities. We can also provide the high quality of the biometric services such as biostatistic and programming. As you know that Clindata are very active in social media, you could always find us in the LinkedIn or Facebook and Twitters. Molly?
Thank you, Kevin. So at this point, we're going to move into our Q&A session. If you have any questions, I encourage you to go ahead and type them into the Q&A box located on the left-hand corner of your screen. Kevin, we have a few questions coming in right now. The first one is, you mentioned study start date in TS dataset. What is study start date in TS dataset?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, the TS study start date is the earliest consent date of the enrolled patients. The patient or subject has a screen failure. Those information is not included. But any patient are enrolled in that study, if they have a consent date, that will be the earliest consent date for any patient will be the study start date.
Okay, and our second question is, do we need to include all other trial summary information, such as study objectives, population for legacy data?
Yeah, for the legacy data, I mean, it is always good to include all the trial summary information for TS dataset. But in terms of the FDA perspective, if it's a legacy data, we believe that they only want to have the study start date information. It is good to have other information, but study start date information is the one that they need for legacy data.
Right. Okay, so we have another question here. Do you think informed consent data, do you think informed consent date in DS domain is required for each subject?
Yeah, I think so. The DS domain need to have this informed, in terms of study, in terms of a subject level, yes, the informed date in that in TS domain should be required. And then TS domain will look at all those informed consent date in TS domain and then pick the earliest one from that from the domain.
Okay. Our next question, what FDA center will use rejection criteria?
Yeah, currently there CBER and CDISC require the CDISC data. So this rejection criteria will be applied to CBER and CDISC at this moment. The medical device centers such as SDRH do not follow this at this moment, but we kind of hope that they will follow sometime soon.
Okay, keep those questions coming. Our next question is, are annotated TFLs officially required at this point?
That's a good question. Yes, it is. That it is required. If it's an STTM, then it is required. If it's a legacy data, I don't think it is required annotation. But you have to submit. But no matter what, you have to submit the blank CR pages. But in terms of STTM annotation, it will be required for CDISC submission data.
Next question. What should we do during a submission with missing data in older studies? As
we mentioned that if there is a missing data, and FDA could reject that submission in the RTF, refuse to file. We kind of show in our slide. So if it's a missing data, then you probably need to find somewhere, and they have to provide to FDA. Especially if it's a critical, such as efficacy or key safety, then I'll believe the FDA really want those data, because a lot of time FDA see the data and they duplicate the result of the table. So without those data, FDA cannot duplicate that result. So you need those data.
Okay, and then our next question is the raw data required?
No, if it's not raw data, when you mention raw data, I believe that raw data from EDC, electronic data captures, no, they're not required. Only STTM atom required in terms of the CD submissions, and then legacy data, which is derived data, is required for legacy studies.
Okay, and then I believe next one is analysis results metadata required in Define.xml currently?
Right now, it's not requirement. It is always good to have it. Right now, Define.xml version 2, you could actually adding the result metadata. It used to be Define.xml version 1 doesn't have a capability, but Define.xml version 2 has a capability to include the result metadata. So it is recommended. The reason that I kind of mentioned about why we need to prepare so perfect package is sometimes FDA will ask the question because they do not understand certain things. And such as result metadata will help FDA understand some of the efficacy analysis. So it is helpful. It's not required. But if you think that's helpful for FDA to understand your analysis, then yes, you should be included.
Okay, next question. Is the new TD trial disease domain required?
I think it depends on study. A lot of time, oncology study is very helpful to include the TD domain. But if it's not required, if you think it's not required for your study level, then maybe you don't need it. But if you believe that it is helpful to include TD domain, then yes, you have to include that thing.
Okay, so if there are any questions, any more questions, please feel free to type them in. We're going to get to the next one here. Are data reviewer guides required for legacy submissions?
No. Actually, data reviewer guide is not required even as STTM submission, not at this moment. We are putting that information to help FDA understand what kind of standard we use for those data, and then what kind of information we cannot tell in Define.xml, we could actually include that into a review guide as a text format, or more easier info, such as data traceability. Those kind of information could go into review guides. So even at this moment, even though we recommend it very strongly, and FDA also kind of want it in a way, but it is not really required. So legacy data, if you want to include it, that would be great, but that is not the requirement.
Okay, and I'll give a few more seconds for any other questions that might come in. Okay, so our next question, what is the minimum requirement for ADRG?
In terms of ADRG is that you want to include that your data set, the list of the data, and then what standard you use, whether it's going to be Atom Implemented Guide 1.0 or 1.1, or 2.1 as a model, and also any standard you use for that Atom data set. And also, if you have a lot of time people include that OpenCDISC validation rule, such as error and warning, that you cannot you find it, but you think that it is useful to include information, why you skip that information. Things like that, it could be helpful.
Okay. This is great. We have more questions. Should programs being submitted be in .text file format or PDF?
Oh, that was a great question. Actually, I talked to FDA about that one. They prefer .txt rather than PDF because in that case, they could just delete the extension and they make it as a SAS and they could run it in their SAS environment. So they prefer .txt format rather than PDF format.
Okay, and then do we have to submit the SDTM programs as well?
No, SDTM program is not a requirement. As you see that ECTD validate ECTD folders, there is a program for Atom and Legacy, but not for SDTM. So it's not required. I'm not sure whether sometimes FDA probably gonna ask you for some very complex SDTM dataset, but at this moment there is no place for SDTM program.
And then another one, Kevin, which programs are required to be sent for a submission?
In terms of usually, I'm not sure whether it's a must or not, but usually we send all the Atom dataset programming and then a key efficacy program. That was a couple, and then FDA probably asked us to submit more TFL SAS programs, but usually what we prepare is that Atom and also efficacy SAS program.
Okay, and then can we include macro in programs or have to be resolved code?
I remember we sending the macro as well for not a utility macro or setup macro, but the macro that produce a result.
Okay, so how about programs for safe analysis?
Can you repeat that again?
The question is, how about programs for safe analysis?
Yeah, if it's critical for your study, yes, you have to include it.
Oh, sorry, it's safety analysis. How about programs for safety analysis?
Yeah, it is critical for your program, then safety analysis probably required, but usually I never send the safety. I always send about efficacy.
So is it the sponsor's choice?
Yes, there's a sponsor choice.
Great. Okay. So that was our last question. A few more seconds if anybody else wants to type in another question. I think we have another one here. Does SDTM programs required? That's the way it was typed in. So does SDTM programs required? I don't know if that's a sufficient question.
I think that it might be the same question that we had before. SDTM programs are not required.
Okay. And then how much detail in the value metadata does the FDA want? All, I'm going to read it out, ORRES fields, or is TESC CD and SAP.QNAM sufficient?
Any value metadata is it should be recommended to include. If you have any kind of value metadata, either Atom or SDTM, yes, it should be. It is recommended to include all the value metadata in Define.xml. Usually in Define.xml.
Okay. And I think these two are coming in, I believe it's for the same question together. What if a CRO says their programs are proprietary for program submissions?
Yes, that was a good question. Well, I think that you have to negotiate with the CRO because as you mentioned, that FDA duplicate the result with the data, and they want to see your code, especially about efficacy analysis, and requires some complex data model or statistical design. Then you want to include those programs in the package, and so that is something that you need to talk to your CRO.
Okay. Any more questions? So the next question is, will we be able to get a copy of this slide deck? So this webinar is currently being recorded, and we will be posting it sometime next week when it becomes available. It has to go through processing, and then it will be posted onto our website. And then, Kevin, are you planning on making this slide deck available in addition to the webinar recording?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody has my contact information, so you could contact me, and then I could provide this as a slide to you. But as Marlene mentioned, that the webinar will be uploaded into our website.
Okay, so if they have any other questions after we go offline, I believe that we can welcome the questions coming into consulting@clindatainsight.com, and that's where you can, Kevin, you can answer the questions offline?
Yes, that is correct. You could do that.
Okay. So at this time, this concludes our Q&A session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, audience. I believe we had a really good session in Q&A. There were a lot of interesting questions. We hope you found this webinar to be informative, and we hope you would consider joining us again at a future webinar. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you.